Welcome on back, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. This is the Melbourne Demons 2024 season review episode. A season where, for the first time in a few years at least, they didn't have a whole heap of success. So we'll jump into that in a minute. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay subscribed. We're doing a review on every team. There's also the podcast that goes live twice a week on Spotify and YouTube, and all the social medias. We've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We've got all of them, so go check all of that out. Let's jump into Melbourne Demons 2024. What to say about it? They finished 11 wins, 12 losses. No draws, 14th on the ladder after multiple seasons in the top four. They won the premiership, then finished top four on the ladder the next 2 years. So not the perfect season for them. Plenty of excuses. We'll get into some of those. We'll have a look at all of that very shortly. We'll jump into their game by game of the season. They started with a tough one, Sydney up at the SCG in opening round. They weren't bad. The first half was pretty close, but in the end, Sydney were the better team and got the job done. They then went on a really good 4-week stretch where they beat the Doggies by 45 points in round one, smacked Hawthorn by 55. Then they went over to Adelaide for a double-header. So they played, I think, on Saturday and then Thursday over there, and beat both Port Adelaide and Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval. So a really good 2-week stretch there, which made them look like they were certainly going to be top 4 team again this year. They then got dumped by Brisbane at the MCG, which was a little bit surprising, but it's not the end of the world. They had their first bye. They came out of that, beat Richmond and then Geelong, which was a big win. I think that was Geelong's first loss of the season. So back in form again, and then it kind of went pear-shaped across the next 5-week period, only winning one game, which was St Kilda. The other 4 were all losses. One to Carlton. The West Coast one was not great. They then lost by 92 points to Fremantle, which was their worst game of the season, and in all honesty, one of the worst performances from any team this season. A really bad loss, 92 points to the Dockers in Alice Springs. And then they lost to Collingwood by 38 points and went into the bye with no momentum, winning just 3 of their previous 7 games. They were still sitting on 7 wins for the season. So at that point, 7 and 6, they're still in the 8. They're still a chance. They just need to come out of the bye and play well. And to be honest, they kind of did do that. They beat North Melbourne by 3 points, which was not a good game. Let's just put that out there. But they got the 4 points. They then played Brisbane at the Gabba. They had every chance, but just lost by 5 points. And that could have been a turning point for their season. They then beat West Coast by 54. Then beat Essendon by 17 in the wet, which was a really good win that had them really looking like they were going to be at least playing finals. Granted, they hadn't beaten much since the Geelong win, because when they beat St Kilda at the MCG, St Kilda weren't playing great football. North Melbourne, West Coast, obviously both bottom 3 teams, and Essendon, this was kind of where they started their slide, to be honest. And then it was a really rough finish to their year. Fremantle beat them again for the second time this year, this time by 50 points, so a combined 142 points between the 2 games. GWS got them in Melbourne. Bulldogs beat them at Marvel Stadium by 51 points to get revenge on their round 1 matchup. Port Adelaide then beat them at the MCG, so second time Port Adelaide beat them this year. Gold Coast, finally, Melbourne got a win and looked really good. Played outstanding football, to be honest, up on the Gold Coast. Beat them by 54 points, and then finished with a pretty dour performance against Collingwood in round 24 to lose by 46 points. And in this season, not in the greatest form. There's been a lot of talk about players staying, players going. Who knows what's happening with them next year. But all that can be said is it's a touch disappointing, especially when you look at round 18. They were flying along. Not obviously going as well as they had previous years, but they were still in contention for a top 4 spot, in all honesty. They'd won 10 games already by round 18, so they were 10-7. Still probably needed 3 wins to play finals from that point. And maybe 4 or 5 if they wanted to make top 4, which they obviously didn't manage to do. But, a bit of a nothing season in the end for the Demons. We'll have a look at the next slide. So this is their last 3 years. Obviously, this year just the 11 wins after 2 years in a row going 16 win seasons. Both offense and defense got worse than both of the previous years. They've gone, obviously, Premiership 2021, then 2nd, 4th on the ladder. Both times failing in finals, but during the home and away season, finished 2nd and 4th, down to 14th this year. If you look at their players' use, that's a really, really low number. The AFL average this year was 39 per club. So Melbourne, overall, haven't been using that many players over the last 3 years, 33, 34 and 36. Their experience kind of dropped a little bit, but not much on last year's team. So not a great deal there. Maybe stagnated a little bit, which can explain a little bit, I guess, in terms of where their season went. But as you can tell, it's just a massive drop-off in actual results. But I don't know if it's fully that bad in Melbourne. So this is a big table of stats. You can pause it, you can screenshot it, do whatever you want with it. But a lot of it's probably irrelevant, but it's just a glimpse at their numbers across the last 3 seasons. As you can see, they were pretty consistent, 22 to 23 across most stats. Their game style stayed similar. Their stats, their numbers stayed very similar in so many areas. All the way down the board. There's not too many discrepancies in numbers. But then when you go to this year, everything kind of just dropped off, which isn't that surprising. But you look at their offense, for starters, 88 and 22, 90 and 23, and then down to 77.6. They just couldn't find offense this year at all. It was their major issue, I guess, or one of their major issues. Defensively, they also have got worse, but not bad. Like 1 goal worse off than last year, which isn't terrible. Like only conceding 78.8 points per game is pretty good, and should have you in position to win a lot of games. But as I said, their offense just was not there this year. That's basically 3.5, 4 goals less, or pretty much 4 goals less than they were kicking last year. So that's their major area of concern. You look at their inside 50, their territory battle. The last 2 years they've dominated that, whereas this year they just could not get the ball forward, which just led to poor performance up forward. Poor scoring, I guess, because their work inside the forward line was still as good, if not better, than last year and the year before. Their forward efficiency was outstanding. It was just their ability to get the ball forward was their big issue this year. You look at their metres gained. Previous 2 years, they're plus 300 per game. This year, they were minus 60. So it's not a huge loss of 60 metres per game, but when you compare it to plus 300 last year, that's more than 2 football fields less in positive metres gained, really. So bit of a drop-off there. Contested footy dropped quite a bit, 10 possessions on last year. Uncontested footy also dropped by like 25. Hardball gets stayed similar-ish, not too bad, but their loose ball gets definitely dropped. Their clearances, both centre and stoppage clearances, dropped. And overall, their ruck work, it's an interesting one because Max Gorn played a really good season. His ruck work, I think, dropped off on last year, but it probably helped that Brodie Grundy was in there last year as well. I know Brodie Grundy didn't play every game, neither did Gorn, but the numbers in ruck work were a bit lower than last year, but at the same time, I think Gawn did a lot more around the ground, but we'll get onto him shortly. I think the takeoff of this is it just wasn't a Melbourne season. They just did not play the same football they have for the previous few years. Is that personnel? Is it players dropping off? Is it other reasons? There's plenty of reasons it could be. Certainly injuries played a part. Certainly some retirees hurt and people changing clubs and whatnot. We'll get all into that shortly in the player evaluation, but Melbourne need to find a way to get back into that area where they can win the ball, get it going forward more often, and maybe that will see them bounce back quicker than most teams do. We'll see. We'll see how we go. Jumping into their scoring, where the points come from, both offensively and defensively. As you can see, kick-ins actually increased offensively. Defensively, still not much the same as 2 years ago. Stoppages didn't change much at all. Like a lot of teams so far that we've looked at in the bottom 8, the turnovers is where they lose points. So they've gone from 51 points offensively down to 40. So that's a drop of over 10 points per game offensively. And you chuck in the fact that they also concede 7 more points from turnovers than they did last year. That's an equivalent of 3 goals just from turnovers that they've swung from 23 down to 24. So that was a major concern for them. Right there, just turnovers and conceding scores from turnovers. And then you look at whether it was defensive half, forward half, or centre bounces. Centre bounce dropped off a little bit, both offensively and defensively, so net 0 really there. Forward half possessions dropped off offensively and they got worse defensively slightly. And then defensively, from the defensive half, they conceded a lot more as well, which is not a good sign, in all honesty, in a team that didn't really win the territory battle too often. And then when they are going forward, they're conceding transition plays, I guess. Over 32 points per game. Defensively is not exactly what you want from the defensive half. We'll jump now into the player evaluation. So these are the players that missed 5 or more games this season. Jake Melksham, he missed 15. Tomlinson missed 15. The big one was Christian Petrarca. He missed 10, pretty much the whole second half of the season. Christian Salem missed 6. Jake Lever missed 5. Stephen May missed 3 or 4, as did Max Gawn. So they had plenty of players miss plenty of games, but in the end, it's not the longest injury list, as you can tell by the fact that they only had 36 players play, but they just had a few players that missed quite a lot, and especially the Petrarca one was one that certainly cost them in the long run. Best players by position this year for the Melbourne Demons. We'll start in the back line at the key defender post. Tom McDonald, he improved on his 2023 output based on AFL ratings. He had a good season. I think he did a good job. He only missed 1 game for the year, did pretty solid. Stephen May missed 4 games. He dropped his output a little bit according to AFL ratings, and I think that's probably a fair assessment of his season, dropping off just slightly, not terribly, but just a little bit. Tomlinson only played 8 games, but the 8 that he played were pretty solid performances from him, in my opinion. Jake Lever, he dropped off. He missed 5 games, as we mentioned before, but his rating certainly wasn't as good as it was last year. Bailey Fritsch, key forward, debatable. Medium forward to key forward, he kind of plays that lead-up forward role. And his output was similar-ish to last year. I think he just lacked a little bit of support in that forward line at times this year. Medium defenders, Trent Rivers, I think he showed enough this year. He wasn't outstanding, but he certainly was okay. Judd McVie, ditto. I think his best was really good. He showed some really good games, especially early in the season. Maybe want a little bit more improvement from him. Hopefully he can show that next year. Christian Salem was solid, slight improvement. Andy Moniz Wakefield obviously didn't play last year, but this year put in some okay numbers in the 6 matches he played. The medium forwards, I think this is their biggest upside here, is Pickett. He's shown the ability to be outstanding. He's slightly improved on his performance last year, and I think has the potential to go up another level based on what I've seen of him. He can really change a game very quickly. We were talking about this in the Adelaide one with Isaac Rankin. He can take a game by the scruff of the neck as well. Very similar in that they mainly play forward, but when you chuck them in the middle, both of these two players really do outstanding work. They can get a clearance, they can break a game open, they can run it, they can kick it. They're good at body work, both in marking contests and on the ground level. So I think both Pickett and Isaac Rankin could be players of the future to watch in that facet, that they can break games open very quickly. And you get a couple opportunities, or your team's in a game, you might only need that one opportunity in that fourth quarter to turn a game. So keep an eye on him, I think. I think we could see some even more improvement from him in 2025. Although I believe he's having a delayed start to the season due to suspension. It's certainly the one area of his game he needs to tighten up, is not always going for the body with the bumps. Maybe considering his options a little bit before he goes hip and shoulders, because he does clean up the head a couple too many times. Neil Bullen, he was solid as well this year. I think he improved. Played a mix of roles, forward, midfield. He played a tagging job on Nick Dacos in like round 12 or whenever they met. He played a variety of roles and did a very good job at most of them. So I think he was another positive sign. Jumping into the full-time midfielders, Christian Petrarca did what he always does. Obviously got injured mid-season, missed the whole second half of the year, and certainly cost him, I think, in the long run. But he has the potential to, well, when I say the potential, he is consistent. He does what he does. He's a very good player, always averaging around about that 16 AFL rating points per game. He's an outstanding player. He's a key part of this Melbourne midfield, and they will be doing everything they can to keep him. I know there's talk that he wants to leave, and now the latest is that he's not leaving. He's committed to Melbourne, so I think it's pretty important for Melbourne to keep him. Looking at the rest of the midfield, Jack Viney was similar numbers as well to his career and his recent years. Clayton Oliver was the big drop-off. I mean, probably won't come as much of a surprise when you look at where he was in the off-season and the troubles he had early year. It's not the best performance to only be 10.7 of an AFL rating when he was over 16. I think that's a fair assessment of what this year was, but not a fair assessment of where he'll be. I think he has the potential still to get back up to those numbers in 2025, 2026. He's an outstanding player that certainly you wouldn't want to underestimate him. Ed Langdon was similar as he always has been. Caleb Windsor was obviously debutant this year and did pretty well for a debutant. Played 19 games, pretty solid rating. He has the potential to jump that up to probably an 11 or 11.5 next year. I think would be a pretty solid improvement, and one that would have him up there as a potential really good player in the future. Sparrow, he dropped off a little bit. And then the final one is Max Gawn. His AFL rating actually went up. I think his ruck work kind of went down. Last year wasn't his best season, to be fair. Whereas this year around the ground, he was outstanding. He's All-Australian again for the 7th time, I think. Absolute legend of a ruckman. He'll go down as one of the best ruckmans of all time in the history of the game. If not, he might even end up as the number one of all time, if he's not already there. And yeah, this year was a great year for him. Obviously, last year wasn't. I don't think the two ruckman role really suits him because he likes to run and just he wasn't able to do that with having a really good second ruckman in with him. But he's getting on, but at the same time, you certainly wouldn't write him off. He's been fantastic, and I feel like he's still got a couple years left in him. These are the players that played in their 2023 team that weren't out there this year. So first off, as we mentioned, Brodie Grundy. I don't think that loss hurt them too much. Obviously, he's a very good player. He's been outstanding for Sydney, especially early season. But him and Max Gawn just did not work. There's no two ways about it. And he's gone to Sydney and it's worked out for him. Melbourne, obviously, it hasn't worked out for them this year, but in the long run, I think it's the better option. James Harmes went to the Bulldogs. He showed some good output this year for the Dogs, so a little bit of a loss, that one. Hibberd, obviously, retired. He didn't have a great season last year. James Jordan, I think he left as a free agent, and he showed really good signs for the Swans, this year. Not outstanding numbers, but solid numbers. But at the same time, if you're going to go to a midfield, Sydney's and get games, Sydney's probably a good one because there's a lot of attention on all of the rest of their midfielders. They've got an outstanding midfield line, and it's probably easy to get under the radar a little bit, I guess. And then obviously the big loss for them this year, without a doubt, was Angus Brayshaw. Him out of their midfield was probably the one kink that they lost, outside of the fact that Clayton Oliver's output dropped off. He would have been huge for them this year, I think, Angus Brayshaw. Caleb Windsor has come in and potentially going to fill that long-term spot, but obviously a very costly loss to the Melbourne midfield this year. It was no Angus Brayshaw, who has retired. That's Melbourne. Their season was not a great one. It's a team that I still think could bounce back next year and play finals, maybe even finish top four. I don't think they're that far outside. As I've kind of been harping on all year, the top 13, 14 teams, maybe even 15 teams, are really competitive. We're really close this year, so it's not going to take much to go from that 14th, 15th spot up to the top six, in my opinion. Likewise, it's not going to be that hard to drop from top six all the way down to 15th next year. Of the teams that we've reviewed so far, I think Melbourne are the best. They were the best this year, and I also think they probably have the best potential for 2025 as well. Obviously, we've started at the bottom, so all the teams below them, I think, finish below them again next year, provided Petrarca stays at Melbourne or they get a really good deal out of offloading Petrarca. But yeah, Melbourne, not their best season. They'll bounce back though, I would imagine. They still have a lot of talent. I expect to see some more improvement from some of their young players. And if they can get a few more keys into their team, probably need a good key forward maybe. They're not the only team looking for one of them though, so they're not easy to find. But that's the Melbourne Demons. That was 2024. Not a great season. But thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down in the comments where you think Melbourne will finish next year. I have them pushing back towards the 8. Will they make the 8? I don't know. But I would say they probably finish between 7th and 9th. Just my guess. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. But let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I said it before, I'll say it again. Plenty of content every day coming out on the YouTube channel especially. So check it all out. There's team reviews, there's award reviews, there's previews for the week's action, there's reviews of the last weekend's action. A lot of content. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one.